So, good morning. First of all, thanks to... just 1 second, sorry. Okay. So thanks to Radical Networks for having us here today, and thanks to Spektrum for hosting this event. Just a short introduction. We are Clusterduck. We are part of Clusterduck. It's an interdisciplinary collective founded at the end of 2016, and you could say we are interdisciplinary, working in many, like in filmmaking, design, research, but our main focus, content-wise, is on the production, creation of internet content, and on the platforms where this content is spread. So this year we focused a lot on memes, actually, and also on social media platforms. And one thing I also want to say, that research we are going to present today is more like a stub or some reflections upon things we encountered during this year while working with memes. And the reason why we started this research is also partially because our interest in memes was born from the fact that we kind of bought into this narrative that was very popular in media earlier this year, that somehow the alt-right had almost got Trump elected by means of memes, and this was a very popular narrative in mainstream media also at a certain point. But lately there was also a lot of deconstruction and criticism of this narrative, like saying that it somehow overstated the power of the alt-right and helped them strengthen their confidence and identity. And so one thing we noticed is that actually, to really assess if this is true or to what extent this is true, what the actual influence of mimetic subcultures on politics and cultures is nowadays, what we need is more quantitative, data-based research, and this is hard to have nowadays because it's really hard to do research on certain platforms, specifically Facebook, which we are going to mention a lot today, for example. So a lot of research you have at the moment is kind of biased because it comes mainly from Reddit and Twitter, because those platforms are more easier to research, and you don't have a lot going on instead on platforms like Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube, which are pretty important. I mean, there are huge numbers of people there. So the title we chose, as I said, I don't want to put the expectations too high. This is more a stub, so we are very open for input also. We were hoping also to get some input from you today. We will try to investigate the role of critical networks at the intersection of memetics and social media data analysis. So the chapters, broadly speaking, we are going to talk about today are firstly, we're shortly going to introduce the importance and availability of data. Then we will present two examples, two researches, which from our viewpoint are quite, they exemplify pretty well the approaches you can find today. So on one side you have a research called From Vaporwave to Tennis Beer Cats, Facebook's Vernacular Meme Neighborhoods, which was done by Oil Lab last year. And this is more kind of a grassroots approach, you could say, from independent researchers. And then you have the research on the origins of memes by means of fringe web communities, which found very wide, I mean, it was spread widely over social media and mainstream media also. Getting some wrong conclusions, I think, from this research. And finally, we will try to trace a broad outlook and conclusions, some takeaways from the things we will have presented so far.
Okay, so right now the data collection and data analysis systems exist mostly with the aim of monetizing data. The image that you can see here comes from a brochure of one of the many trend forecasting companies. It's called Next Atlas, and is mainly used by advertising agency because they say that they can forecast the future, the trends of the future, and of course they don't at the moment. We called them to make a free trial with them to see how this platform works, and we have to talk with 1 hour with them to have a free trial that expires in just 24 hours, because one account with Next Atlas costs around 2,000 euros per year, so 20,000 euros per year. So let's say that they make the data count a lot. So we also want to make the data count, but we think that data has also a cultural value. Like many other researchers, activists, and academics, we think that data coming from social network platforms can be relevant for research, and the right to have free access to them should be demanded, considering all the privacy and anonymity and limitation terms as free rights. So you can think about Facebook as a huge library full of books about humans, a library which is right now almost completely closed to the public and academic use. We know very well that not only the market, but also art and policy today are related to big data. So for starters, let's see together what is the situation at the moment and how does this data collection take place. There are at the moment 3 ways of collecting data. The first way is direct database access, which is spontaneous donation of data from social networking service, which is very rare actually. The second way is through sanctioned API, so when a service or software communicate with components of a social media platform, and this is legal, this is allowed by social media services. And the third way is interface crawling, so the ones going on with spiders and bots, and which at the moment is not so legal, we will see. So about direct database access, usually it happens when a social network service decide to donate his data to a research institution. Twitter, for example, usually donate with a bit of delay his archive to the Library of Congress. So this way, let's say each of the ways has a pro and contra for researchers. With direct database access, you are perfectly legal, it's well structured, and it's already anonymized, so you can use you can use it for your researches without any problem. The second way at the moment is valid just for Reddit and Twitter. You can access to Reddit API through pushbit.io. This is one of the third-party services. About Twitter, there is different services. One is streamdata.io, which is granting to researchers the 1% of all the data streaming you get from YouTube, from Twitter, which is actually quite a lot. And there are other software like the University of Indiana Observatory on Social Media, OSOME, that they made several tools trending this trend tool, for example, we use it for our presentation, while Facebook at the moment is not offering any proper service for data sharing, with the exception of a very recent initiative, which is actually a fake one in our opinion. And this is because, of course, you remember about the dramatic data access restrictions and the deprecation by Facebook of most of its API following the Cambridge Analytica scoundrel. The third way is user interface crawling, which is using bots or spiders to communicate with the user interface directly and gather data. This way is, of course, quite illegal, so it has problems when you go to use your data for academic publication, because the ethic
can be subjected to restriction, the use of data that is collected this way, let's say, because of course it violates the terms and conditions you subscribe, you accept the moment you register on Facebook. Many of these ways to access data are violating these terms, so legally they can't really be of any use. So what happened after the Cambridge Analytica scandal, as we know, is that Facebook deprecated, the access to certain data was restricted, and officially to protect, of course, its users. That was the official justification. But we see this critically because, as mentioned at the beginning, if you use this data, if you want this data for marketing purposes, there are many ways to access it, and there are many ways to use it, because of course this is the model on which Facebook works and on which it makes money. But as a PR operation and to show that it was somehow aware of the importance of data for academic research, Facebook launched an initiative which claimed to intend to give access to researchers to large amounts of its data. Actually, when you, I would welcome if anyone of you has more experience or information about this, because the thing that, at least for me as an independent grassroots researchers, trying to get more information about this initiative was very hard. It's very opaque in my view. If you do a little bit of research, you find a lot of website where this initiative is presented, and it mentions the foundations which are involved and the universities which are involved. So clearly there will be high-profile academic groups which will have access to this data. So in a way, I'm not saying this is not true, but what I'm saying, what I think is critical about it, is that if you are not part of established academic institutions, you don't have access to this data. And that's, I think, something we should address critically. Because what we, as Silvia already mentioned, what changed is that all this software you could use before to get data from Facebook is not working, or potentially will stop working very nearly in the future, and this is actually something we should, I think, address critically, because I think everyone should, of course, under all the anonymization processes should take place, and the data should be anonymized, of course. This goes without mentioning, but it should be accessible, I think, to anyone, also to grassroots researchers or researchers that don't have Stanford University or whatever big prestigious academic institution helping them to access this data. Actually, this is an example. Now we are going into one of the first practical examples. This is the research done by OwnLab in 2017, and I think this is interesting because this showcases what was possible, or still partially is possible, but under much more restrictions. If you use, this research was done using NetWits, so that was one of the applications that Silvia mentioned, and was done in 2017 by Hagen Foundation and Mark Tutors in collaboration with Carlo Di Gaetano. And what they did is researching Facebook pages, Facebook groups, and tracing the connections between them. And so this is what they got from their research. And as I mentioned, they call this vernacular neighborhoods. And it's, I mean, the visualization in itself, I think, is quite impressive. But of course, this is already old in a way because it's more than a year old. And also, what this research doesn't tell, I mean, it's not showing us all of the Facebook groups, of course. This is just a small fraction. But even in itself, even if it's just a small fraction, it already shows, I mean, how big the implications could be if you could be able to do more research, a complete research on Facebook and all these mimetic subcultures that are changing day by day. And I think we should actually have a constant monitoring of what is going on there, maybe even a long-term thing going on. But this at the moment is not really possible or is very hard to do, and that's somehow just, I think, the main takeaway we want to discuss today. So what they found out kind of were interesting connections between different groups. They clustered them. So you have the classic vaporwave memes, so to say. Then you have right-wing populist memes. You have a group, a cluster that they decided to call Western nationalism, and a cluster they decided to call imperial memes. And what this tells us, what this shows us, I think, is that I mean, something we already all know is how hard it is to distinguish between the trivial and what really is political. So what is also happening on a lot of Facebook groups, for example, is that you have groups about classical art or architecture or whatever that get infiltrated by the alt-right, who would troll under posts of, I don't know, classical Greek statues claiming how these are an example of how superior the Western culture is or whatever. And so there are very interesting dynamics there that we should take a close look, but this is hard to do, and this is, yeah. So this leads us to the next point somehow, that, as I mentioned at the beginning, so on one side you have this narrative about meme magic and the alt-right getting Trump elected, posting Pepe the Frog memes. And on the other side we have critical researchers who are working hard to debunk this narrative. And it would be much easier, I think, if we would have access to the data to really research. Also now, I mean, what we are seeing, and as we will mention later, is that actually of course, what is happening is that we have institutional powers that are kind of interfering in these groups and manipulating, doing intelligence operations, basically. You have this also going on from a lot of actors. I mean, also now, for example, with the European elections coming next year, there are efforts from the European Union to finance NGOs and groups who work against fake news. I mean, this is of course something that on one side is interesting, but on the other side should be critically addressed as well, because it's not always clear on these groups who is an institutional backed actor and who is just a normal person, and this is a big problem, as you may realize. So next, okay.
In the time following Brexit and Trump election, there has been a lot of media buzz about filter bubbles prevent us from having control on the local and objective political climate, and on how social networks make us lose touch with reality. So one of the motivation, yeah, we talked already about that. But anyhow, after Trump's election, social media prank. We were wondering how social media pranks influence the fate of the U.S. election. After that Trump won, there was a large debate about fringe communities and how Paul and Gab and the Donald could influence the mainstream communities, and how the press reacted in many different ways. One of the first reaction was, oh yes, they are extremely powerful, they are very influential, they are the most web community, influential web community on Earth. And after a while they started to think, oh no, we should not name them because we are doing publicity to them by name them. And if you know about kek and what is kek magic, if you ever hear that thing, kek is basically the god of the alt-right. It's a magic frog. Is actually an old Egyptian god that they found on the internet, all these kind of connections, and they decided that kek, the original name of the Egyptian god, was the god that protects the alt-right because it was a frog, and it has a lot of connection with magic. So they talk about magic and how if you invoke a frog, this can bring power to you, and it is actually real if you think it in a mediatic way, because they are able, the alt-right, to manipulate all the press and all the bad talking about them at their advantage. So what happened here is we can use the Osome tools that I was telling you before to see what is the hashtag Pepe the Frog reaction. Oh, okay. So yeah. So there's this researcher that they thought, okay, how can we fight against Pepe magic and Kek's magic with science? So they decided to make a research which is called On the Origins of Memes by Memes of Fringe Web Communities, and it is a work compiled by various universities. I will not list them because we don't have time, and their goal was to understand how fringe communities can disseminate and memes and influence mainstream communities. The study works as such. They create a database scraping from Paul, the Donald, which is the subreddit the Donald, which was the base of alt-righters in favor of President Trump, and Gab. Gab is new social media which has become a place for alt-righters and hate speechers and racial speech because of his claim and his I mean, in the front page of Gab, you read that a social network that champions free speech, individual liberty, and free flow of information online. So they don't have any censor.
As far as I know, correct me if I'm wrong, but this was an answer to alt-right profiles being censored on Twitter. So it's Twitter for the alt-right, basically.
Okay, so what they do is that they gathered all images and memes, or any kind of images, also image about famous people or events, history events, and then they gather a second data set, which is from mainstream communities, so Reddit, 4chan, and Twitter in general. We don't have Facebook because of the problem you already know, and the third data set is from Know Your Meme, which is the meme archive, and is used as annotation purposes. So what they do, basically, okay, we can see the pie pipeline here. They gather data from the first database, so the fringe communities database. They create clusters of images, so they group the clusters. From the cluster, they individuate medoid, which is the most similar image of all the images you have. Then they confront the medoid with the annotation dataset, so with the know your memes information, and they get what it is. They get, this is, for example, this meme is this a pigeon, okay? But they can also get, this is a picture of Trump, this is a picture of Sanders, etc. Then they confront the first data set, the one from fringe communities, with the second one, which is the one from mainstream community. And with this kind of system, they can gather data like, for example, this chart, where you see all the most common arguments that are used in these social networks, and also they can get some results about influence. So they basically have a response of how fringe communities really influence mainstream communities. So we can take a look at this.
Yeah, so basically I will rush through this because we are out of time, but basically what mainstream media made out of this was the left-hand meme somehow. What came out of it was, Paul and the Donald are more influential, were the most influential communities during the presidential campaign, and the takeaway that most media got from this was somehow that the alt-right communities were somehow setting the tone of the discussion on the internet. And but this, of course, is not what the research was actually saying. What is more interesting is that the research pointed out, for example, that the Donald had greater influence for the number of memes posted on it, and that this could be partially traced back to the fact that the Donald actually was also getting financial support from the official Donald Trump presidential campaign. So I think one thing we could take away from this is that we urgently need more investigation on the impact and the role of institutional or para-institutional actors in supporting certain fringe communities or in interacting with certain fringe communities, and how this influences the bigger picture. And also one thing that should be critically pointed out is that also the authors of this research were somehow pointing out how the research could be used to trace memes that could be identified as hate speech on certain groups. And so we know that based on this, for example, Facebook is, for example, an image that we used to promote an event on Facebook was censored because it was including Pepe the Frog, and this was identified by Facebook as a hate symbol. But I think this is also something critical. Because you can't. Memes are in a way floating signifiers. They're not. They're still very contested. It's so to say the terrain where we are fighting right now. So you cannot easily just label one picture or a meme as hate speech. It's not as simple as that. And the recent example is, for example, the NPC meme, which came out over these days and is that came also out in public discourse as an alt-right meme. But this is only partially true, because now we have many actors from the leftist groups and leftist scene which are trying to reappropriate this meme, because it's actually a meme that can be somehow manipulated very easily. Unfortunately, I think we don't have time. I would like to dive more into this meme and explain what the background is. Maybe you can do that in the Q&As. So shortly to that's just to mention the communities that are missing. I think we have to jump over that. For the conclusions, we just wanted to present what we think should be the approach that we would encourage. So that's more a grassroots approach by you could say fittingly critical networks, by grassroots critical networks who somehow get data from social media and use it to analyze what is going on.
Okay, so we have 3 projects going on at the moment with our collective. One is Delicious Links. It is basically a group of Telegram chats with different arguments, with any of you can participate, and the chats are linked to a website archive through bridgebots, which directly, pass the information to the website, our website, which is online, and we sent us link. I don't know if you remember Delicious. This was a very old software where you can save links of you're interested. The second project going on is MetaMemer Labs. It's a project which we are taking part to this project, which actually is a very huge project, and the project is affiliated with the Philosopher's Meme blog that I advise you to read because it's a very great blog, and it would be, basically what we are doing with Delicious, but hugely. So it will link not just Telegram chats, but also Discords and also Facebook group, and so it will integrate the part that is missing from the research we were talking about before, and they are doing it. It needs a lot of resources at the moment, and we are encountering the problem that we were telling before, that scraping is actually not so legal, let's say. And the third project, it's deep meme clustering, carried out by Shaglar, who is actually here with us. He's part of the collective, and it is using neural networks to create meme clustering, similar to the project we were talking about before, but we are offering our links and our collective research to find all the communities that we want to see in the database. So basically we are kind of trying to eliminate the bias from our data set. And yeah, okay, so these are the resources.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, can you do me a favor when I ask a question? Can you repeat it on the microphone for the live stream?
Okay.
Oh, actually. So yeah, we have time for maybe like 2 questions. Does anyone have one? Okay. Oh, okay. All right. Well, we'll start with you.
Yeah, so you gave us a ton of really awesome information. If we want to follow up on this, what's the best way to do that?
I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. So,
Okay, so as I said, we have a lot of research chats, and we collaborate with a lot of different peoples around the world at the moment. So if I don't know, we can send you the invite, and so we can find ways. I don't know, like we can get in touch. I don't know where we can.
Or maybe just like after their talk or during the lunch or something, you could talk more and find out how to get connected. Yeah. We have other questions? Okay. You'll ask the question then. Oh, okay. We'll do this, you and you. So.
Have you considered using Mastodon as a data source?
Okay, that's, I think, a very interesting question. If we have considered using Mastodon as a data source?
Yes, we have actually. I'm sorry we didn't mention Mastodon in the presentation. You are totally right. We were ignorant when we started because no one of us was using Mastodon, but then few of us started to use it, and so now we are going to do that for sure.
Could you define what a critical network is?
Okay, if we could define what a critical network is, I'm sure there are lots of people in this audience who could do it much better than we could do. For us, in this context, we were talking, the connection with the idea of critical networks was that we were actually noticing that many of the efforts that were going on that Silvia mentioned at the end of the presentation were done by grassroots loose networks of people basically on different platforms. And so in that term, I think the term critical is less defining a technical aspect, but more cultural, political stance by these networks and the purpose for which the data collected by these networks would be used.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask how do you actually anonymize this data at the same time keep some of the relevant source information, for example?
Yeah. So the question is, how do we anonymize this data but keep the crucial information for us? You want to answer? Maybe Shala, you want to answer? No?
What people often do is to identify which part of the data is linked to a person, for example, if it's about persons, and which is not, and then, for example, hash the relevant information and destroy links, basically. So make it unique. The things, for example, a unique person will stay a unique identifier, but this unique identifier is not being able to be traced to a real person. But generally speaking, this is like hugely complex task, and people are suffering solving this in a way that you can still obtain the relevant information, but really not endanger people. Sometimes in the political context, even make their lives much worse. Yeah, but I think this is something that like a big data researcher could answer better than I can.